Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of AI in the Classroom Daily, a podcast helping educators make sense of AI without the hype. I'm Dan Cogan-Drew, and transparently, I use AI as a thinking partner in preparing each of these episodes because I think the best way to talk honestly about AI in education is to work with it openly. So today I want to talk about Khanmigo, Khan Academy's AI tutoring chatbot, and what its story reveals about a set of assumptions the edtech industry keeps making about how students learn and what motivates them to engage. I'm drawing on three sources: a reported piece from Matt Barnum in which Sal Khan reflects on Khanmigo's art, postmortem by math educator and writer and skeptic Dan Meyer, and a piece from Ethan Mollick's One Useful Thing newsletter about the interface problem in AI more broadly. Links to all three are in the show notes. So 3 years ago from the TED stage, Sal Khan said that the AI tools like Khanmigo represented, quote, probably the biggest positive transformation that education has ever seen, end quote. He described a future in which every student on Earth would have access to an AI-powered personal tutor. Those words generated millions of views, a book deal, substantial philanthropic and government funding. The Gates Foundation funded Khanmigo licenses in Newark, New Jersey. Indiana made state funds available for schools to use it. Palm Beach County in Florida received a $2 million commitment. Microsoft sponsored licenses for teachers in 49 countries. Now, 3 years later, Sal Khan tells Chalkbeat, quote, for a lot of students, it was a non-event. They just didn't use it much, end quote. Khan Academy's chief learning officer, Kristen DeCerbo, said, quote, so far, I am not seeing the revolution in education, end quote. Now, Dan Meyer's framing is direct. Khanmigo as software still exists. You're going to find it in the Khan Academy sidebar. But Khanmigo as an idea, as evidence that software can tutor as well as a human, that claim has not held up. Now, before I go further, just a note on sourcing here. The Chalkbeat piece is reported journalism and is the most factual account we have of Khan's own words and Khan Academy's data. The Meyer piece is a critic's analysis, clearly written from Dan Meyer's skeptical perspective. I find his structural argument worth taking seriously, but I want to be transparent that it's not a neutral account. If you follow Dan Meyer, you'll know what I mean by that. So what happened? There are two answers, and I think both are relevant here. The first is the answer Khan Academy offered. Students don't know how to ask questions well. DeCerbo said in a recent webinar that what they were seeing was more passive interaction than they had hoped for. Khan himself offered an analogy. Imagine he walked into the back of a classroom and waited for students to come to him. Some would, most wouldn't. That, he said, has been the experience of Khanmigo. I think that analogy is clarifying, but it points in a direction that Khan may have not intended. And that is that if you walk into the back of a classroom and wait, most students don't come. But that's not primarily a student motivation problem. I consider that a teaching design problem. Creating the conditions for productive engagement, I think, is the teacher's job. That work happens before a student is ready to ask a question, and it cannot be delegated to a chatbot. The second answer comes from Meyer, and I think it's more structural. He tracks what Khan Academy did in response to low usage over Khanmigo's 3 years. The tool started as a small avatar in the corner of the screen, then it grew larger, then it began appearing 1 second after page load, then in 2026 it became always on, activated without any action from the student. Khan Academy told Chalkbeat that they made the change because students were not seeking out Khanmigo's help as much as they had hoped. Well, Meyer's point is straightforward. If the tool's value were clear, it would need to insert itself more and more forcefully into the student's experience. A tool that has to do that is responding to evidence that students are not choosing to use it, and product developers need to pay attention to that pattern. What I think is interesting is there's a third lens here that's worth adding, and it comes from Ethan Mollick. And Mollick writes about AI interfaces for knowledge workers. Not students specifically, but his argument has direct implications for what we saw in Khanmigo. He cites a recent research study in which financial professionals used an AI chatbot to complete a complex task. They did see a productivity gain, but it was partially offset by the cognitive burden the interface itself created. The AI responded with walls of text, offers to pursue new topics, sprawling back and forth. And once a conversation got disorganized, it stayed that way. The AI mirrored back whatever disorganized structure the user brought in. The user got overwhelmed and didn't reorganize, and both sides kept compounding the problem. The people most affected, Mollick notes, were the least experienced users, exactly the people who stood to gain the most from the tool. You can see where I'm going with this. If you apply that to a middle schooler opening Khan Academy to work through a math problem they're already uncertain about, they don't know what they're confused about yet. They type something stilted, halting into Khanmigo. The chatbot responds with a structured prompt, a follow-up question, an offer to explore a related concept. Now, the student who's already at the edge of their working knowledge is now managing a conversation that has gotten away from them. They type IDK. That's not the student who lacks curiosity. That's a student whose cognitive load just exceeded what the interface could support. And that's the point to make about interfaces. And I think this matters because de Serbo's explanation that students aren't great at asking questions locates the problem in the student. Malick's research suggests that the interface itself may be a significant part of what's making engagement difficult. And those are very different diagnoses, and they lead to very different responses. So I want to break this down for each of the different audiences we usually speak to in this show. For classroom teachers, I would say the most useful observation across all three pieces came not from a researcher or administrator, but from a comment on Meyer's post. And if you haven't read Meyer's post, highly recommend it. Written by a professional math tutor who described how she actually spends her time with students. Roughly 40% of her time, she said, goes into building a relationship, asking about what's going on in a student's life, what they're working on, what they're worried about. Another 40% goes to building confidence, reassuring students that they're on the right track, that it's okay to try. And only about 20% is actually teaching the content. Now, she's not describing inefficiency. What she's describing is what effective tutoring requires. Her point was that most students are not sitting down with a tutor because they are intrinsically motivated to learn the material. They are trying to get through their classes. The tutor's job is to get them genuinely interested in the material, and that is relational work that a chatbot cannot do. So, teachers, to address you directly, I think this maps on to what you already know from your own classrooms. The work of motivating a student, of understanding what they actually need before they can even form a question, that's not the preliminary work to teaching, that is teaching. And I think there's an underlying concept here at the root of products like Khan Academy that have been accused of working for 5% of students, and I think it's because they take for granted an intrinsic motivation, which perhaps Sal Khan has always had as a learner. Perhaps his most immediate interactions with learners are characterized by that kind of disposition, which is shared by a very small percentage of users at large. Implication for instructional coaches. Khanmigo was designed to be Socratic, so it's not going to give away the answer. It would respond to student questions with prompts and follow-up questions. That's a sound pedagogical principle. The problem is that Socratic dialogue requires a student who's already engaged with the problem. A student who doesn't yet know what they're confused about will not benefit from a tool that responds to their confusion with more questions. And as Malick's research suggests, they may end up more cognitively burdened than when they started. Coaches should be thinking about what the instructional conditions need to be in place before a student can use an AI tool productively. That preparation is the teacher's work, and you can't skip it. For district leaders, I would say that the Malick research adds a layer to what's often a purely motivational conversation about AI adoption. When we talk about students not engaging with AI tools, the tendency is to frame it as a training problem. Students need to learn how to use these tools better, but that may be only partly true. If the interface itself is creating cognitive overhead that disproportionately affects less experienced users, then training students harder to use a difficult interface is not the right solution. We're forcing the issue. The question to bring up to your AI vendors is whether the tools they are offering have been designed with the actual cognitive demands of your student population in mind, what the evidence is that they have for that claim. I want to close with Khan's own reassessment because I think it points in the right direction. He now says that the biggest lever for improving student learning is investing in human systems, with technology in a supporting role. Khanmigo has been embedded back into Khan Academy's core practice workflow rather than operating as a standalone destination students are supposed to seek out on their own. That sequence, technology following human-led instruction rather than replacing it, I think that's the right frame. It's consistent with what this show has argued about across many episodes, that AI should be following the lesson plan, not writing it. Khanmigo's original design asked AI to lead, to initiate engagement, to sustain motivation, to do the relational and pedagogical work that a teacher would ordinarily do. What the last 3 years demonstrated is that students do not seek out that kind of support from a tool sitting in a sidebar. It does not mean that AI has no role in tutoring or practice. It just means that the role comes after a teacher has done the work of activating a student's engagement with the material. At that point, when a student is inside a problem, already motivated to work through it, an AI tool can be genuinely useful. It can answer follow-up questions, provide additional practice, offer feedback on a draft, but it can't create the conditions that make any of that possible. So the practical question for educators is not whether to use AI in learning, it's where in the instructional sequence AI can actually help and where the work still requires a person. With that, thanks for listening to today's episode. I hope you found it useful. Check out the show notes and continue to follow us for our next episode coming tomorrow.